How many of y'all know that we need bonding? And I know Sharon and I were talking today a little bit about bonding, and she brought up the fact that, that she could tell that, I had bonded at least with my mother. And, probably not like I should have, but there was a little bit of a bonding there with me and my mother. And I thank God for that, because I didn't have any kind of a bonding with my father at all. And there was none. Didn't have a father in my life. And so, uh, and I did have my mother, but my mother, of course, there was a lot of things that, going on in her life and everything. And she had a hard time. There was a lot of struggles. And I think that kept a lot of the bonding that needed to be done there as a child with your mother. But anyway, I just thank God that, what he's brought me out of, and the things that he's taught me, and he's taught me the importance of bonding. And so I want to do this part 3 tonight. And what I want to do is I just want to talk about the benefits of attachment. All right. So I want to talk about the benefits of attachment. Attachment has many benefits. It really does, Sharon. It has many, many benefits. And I can think of 3 of them right now. I can think of 3 of them. But people who are attached or bonded to God and others have a good basis for morality. And they also have an increased ability to handle stress, and their accomplishments have meaning. Their accomplishments have meaning. And what I want to do is I want to explain this, okay? And let's take the first one, morality. Sharon, we'll take the first one. That's good, Sharon. Number 1, morality. And the Bible talks about morality based on love, not on principles or rules. If God has created us with a need for connections to himself and to others, then we wander away. We experience loss and pain. And a good mother doesn't hold her child because she thinks that she ought to, right? Isn't that right? She picks up her child because she feels his discomfort or her discomfort. She loves him. She loves her. So a friend does not visit her sick friend because she should, but because she feels for the friend's infirmity. And only compassion drives us to real sacrificial love, right? I said only compassion drives us to real sacrificial love. Many times in the gospel, we read that Jesus had compassion on the people. And the Greek word for compassion has a root close to the word bios. It means a deep feeling from a deep attachment and empathy. So you see, the Bible does not say that Jesus gave because he should. Right? Don't say that. Doesn't say he gave because he should, or thought it was the right thing to do. He did not give to get points with his conscience, but he gave out of the deep empathy for others, a deep sharing of others' feelings that comes only from attachment. I know that if I didn't get attached to people, there's no way that I could be a minister. I might as well just hang up my hat now and go on. Because if you're going to be in ministry, you're going to be a minister, Christian, then you're going to have to learn how to get attached to people. You're going to have to let them get attached to you, and you need to get attached to them. Have you ever noticed that many often do what they know is wrong? Have y'all ever noticed that? Anybody noticed that besides me? That many often do what they know is wrong. Rules rarely keep them in line. Okay? So in other words, rules really don't mean anything to them. It doesn't keep them in line. You see, love does a much better job of keeping us moral. Did you know that? I said love does a much better job of keeping us moral. We think of how we might hurt the one that we love more often than we think of some code we must keep. I know I sure don't like to hurt nobody. I'm not saying that I've never hurt people. I know that I have. But I don't want to. I surely don't want to hurt nobody. And let's look at number 2, Sharon. Handle stress. Handle stress. The benefits of attachment. Number 2, handle stress. You see, when people have good friends to support them, they can handle stressful situations more easily. Do y'all believe that? You think that's true? You think when people have good friends to support them, that they can handle stressful situations more easily? I do. You need to learn, you see, the importance of deep attachments with others. It's very important. So along with a deep attachment to others and your relationship with God, do you know that it will sustain you? Amen? Also, you can then reach out to your friends and draw on their strength in your times of need. Boy, I know I've done that a lot. I really have. You see, your bonds of love with others and God will bring you through. It'll bring you through it. Your bonds of love with others and God is going to bring you through your mess, your troubles. It's going to help you. It's going to bring you through. And number 3, Sharon, meaning for accomplishments. Meaning for accomplishments. So you see, bonded people are able to tolerate and to use constructively time alone. People are able to tolerate. Bonded people are able to tolerate and use constructively time alone. Being alone does not mean that they are isolated. Okay? And as I've already said about emotional object consistency, bonded people have the love inside of them for whomever they are attached to. They have it stored up in their emotional tank, and it multiplies itself through a lifetime. Because they are not afraid of being alone. You know, Sharon, well, she got kicked out of the room. She lost her connection, but Sharon is a widow lady. And she's pretty much alone. If you want to, she's a widow lady. You know, she lives on her own. She doesn't have a husband. But she's not isolated. Just because she's alone, she's a widow woman, doesn't mean that she's isolated. She's not. And she's not afraid of being alone. We've had several talks, and she says, I'm not afraid of being alone. So she's not afraid of it. And she accomplishes a lot. I know her life, so she accomplishes many things. So it hasn't slowed her down, and it hasn't stopped her because she's alone. But you see, they also know the real reason for work too. They do not work to pile up possessions. Some people work to pile up possessions. They do not work to run from pain. Okay? They don't work to run from pain. They work for the family of humanity. You see, bonding gives meanings to one's accomplishments. So in addition, it fuels the rest of our development. Learning how to bond, creates more ability to attach to others and enables us to develop in all the ways that God designed. Think of that. I said learning how to bond creates more ability to attach to others and enables us to develop in all the ways that God designed. You see, people who can't make emotional attachments live in a state of perpetual hunger. They have a crying need that's not being met. Did you hear me out? I said this is for people who can't make emotional attachments. They have a crying need that's not being met. You see, these people generally go through 3 stages of isolation, okay? Talking about the people that can't make emotional attachments right now. And these people generally go through 3 stages of isolation, Sharon. So, because people have a natural need for relationship. All right? People have a natural need for relationship, and the first stage that they go through when they fail to bond with God and others is protest. That's the first one. Protest. The protest, they protest their lack of relationship. Okay? They protest their lack of relationship. They feel sad, and they also feel angry. I said they feel sad and they feel angry. Now, if you doubt this tonight, I want you to look at a lonely child, okay? Or look at an abandoned lover. The pain that lonely, isolated people feel, you see, is a good thing. All right? Did you hear me out? I said the pain that lonely, isolated people feel is a good thing. For it points to vital needs. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, said Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, for they will be filled. Somebody want to put Matthew chapter 5 verse 6. You want to do that. Matthew chapter 5 verse 6. You see, if our lives were perfect, we wouldn't seek after God, would we? If our lives were perfect, we wouldn't seek after God, right? If we didn't feel hungry, we wouldn't eat. And we might all starve to death. So if isolation continues too long without relief, the protesting person moves into the second stage, Sharon. The second stage of depression and despair. So you see, the hope that needs will be met begins to wilt. Like a plant without water. You see, depressed people look hopeless. Their eyes don't sparkle. Their shoulders slump. Their faces are drawn and tired. They long for something that they are not getting. And in reality, this is still a good stage. I said in reality, this is still a good stage. Because you see, depression people are at least in touch with what they want. So they're still in touch here. They just feel that they will never get it. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, says the teacher in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 12. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 12. You see, depressed people's hearts are sick because of their unanswered need for relationship. But they still feel the need, though. They still feel the need. So, if depression and despair continue long enough without anyone intervening to relieve the loneliness, then the third stage of detachment sets in. And people who reach this stage are detached both from their own need for others and from the outside world. They are out of touch with themselves. And at times they no longer even feel alive anymore. You see, some people will cut themselves because it describes their detachment this way. You know, we have cutters, we have people who cut themselves. So some people will cut on themselves because it describes their detachment this way. Because if they cannot feel their pain, then it makes them feel dead inside. So if they can't feel their pain, then they start to feel dead inside. So they will cut on themselves so they can feel something. So for some, they will have to cut themselves in order to know that they can still feel something. And we know that this is self-destruction. We know that. But to the cutter, it's a way of staying alive. Am I making sense? I said, but to the cutter, it is a way of staying alive. I hope I'm making sense to you guys tonight. You see, they just want to know that they are at least physically alive because emotionally they feel dead. They are detached. A more acceptable way in our society to be detached is demonstrated by the successful business people who drive themselves to achieve. They get awards and large salaries, but their spouses and their children often tell a different story, don't they? They often tell a different story. Isolation masks itself in many ways. Often problems with one thing cover up the real problem of lack of relationship. Did you hear me out? I said often problems with one thing covers up the real problem of lack of relationship. You know, I've been in ministry for a long time now, and I've learned so much from people. And that's how that I can say some of the things that I say is because I've spent so much time learning people, listening to them. They tell me some of the reasons why they do some of the things that they do. And I don't write it down to try to remember it. I just remember it. It just comes to me a lot of times. Especially when I'm working on a message. It'll come back to my remembrance. And I think it's good that people need to hear these kind of messages. I mean, it might be hard for some of you guys to hear these types of messages, but I think it's needed. Mouse. Yeah, but, well, I won't go there, but it... Oh, well, we'll skip that. But also, too, tonight, I'm going to try not to keep y'all real long, but I want to talk a little bit too about the failure to bond, and I'm not going to complete this, so I have to pick it up tomorrow night. But I want to talk a little bit too about the failure to bond. I want to talk a little bit about the symptoms when we fail to bond. The symptoms. You know, isolation masks itself in many ways. Did you know that? I said isolation masks itself in many ways. And like I said, other problems with one thing cover up the real problem of a lack of relationship. Okay, Sharon, let's take the first symptom when we fail to bond, okay? We're going to take the first symptom here when we fail to bond, and that is depression. Number one is depression. You know, depression is a psychiatric disorder marked by sadness, inactivity, difficulty with thinking and concentration, a significant increase or decrease in appetite and time spent sleeping, feeling of rejection and hopelessness, and sometimes suicidal thoughts or an attempt to commit suicide. So depression can in part be caused by a person trying to repress his or her feelings of sadness and anger. So you see the two ingredients of the God-given protest against the lack of love. Depression sometimes manifests itself more subtly than in the deep blackness, inside. You see, it masks itself as a grayness in outlook. Depressed people lose their range of emotional functioning. They lose the color in their life. Their entire world, you see, begins to look gray. And many depressed people prefer gloomy weather because it matches the way that they feel inside. Do you believe that? They really do. I said many depressed people prefer gloomy weather because it matches the way they feel inside. Sometimes a sunny day can make them more depressed because sunshine contrasts with how they feel inside. Depressed people lose interest in doing things and in being with people because simple social activity does not get to the root of the need. So they feel so distant emotionally in social situations where others are in more up moods. And therefore they often withdraw from social activities and relationship, which only furthers their isolation. And another symptom of the failure to bond, Sharon, number 2, is feelings of meaninglessness. Meaninglessness. Feelings of meaninglessness. That's number 2. People who are isolated emotionally feel that life has no meaning because they often confuse this feeling of meaninglessness with not having purpose. They desperately try to find meaning in some activity or ministry. These attempts, however, only push them further into isolation. It doesn't help them. It doesn't fix them. It just makes things worse. It pushes them further into isolation. You see, they are lacking the true meaning of life, which is love. You see, I've heard many people say that they have lots of money, but it really means nothing to them, and they still feel empty inside, even though they have money, they can go buy and do what they want. They still have an emptiness there. You see, these feelings of meaninglessness often come upon people after they have lost a relationship and have not yet replaced it. And in the depression following the loss, they not only grieve but go into isolation as well. They cut themselves off from other people. And they're envisioning a life without meaning, and hope can drive them to suicidal thoughts. And they do not realize, you see, the lack of bonding is often at the root of this. Here we go, the lack of bonding. It's at the root of it. And the third symptom of failure to bond, Sharon, number 3, is feelings of badness and guilt. Feelings of badness and guilt. That's number 3. Feelings of badness and guilt. And you know, I believe to understand this symptom, we have to recognize a basic fact of the emotional world. An isolated self is a bad self. Okay? I said an isolated self is a bad self. In reality, isolated people who fail to bond are not bad. They just think they're bad. Okay? I said isolated people who fail to bond are not bad. They just think they are bad. And alone, self seems to be an unloved self. Okay? I said an alone self seems to be an unloved self. And that translates to bad self. So lonely people feel bad. Okay? I said lonely people feel bad. or they feel guilty because they feel unloved. You see, their legalistic brain translates this feeling into something like this: I feel lonely, therefore I am not loved. If I'm not loved, it must be because I am unlovable. I am bad, or someone would love me, so I must be bad. You see, we go on how others feel about us for our self-worth to a very large extent. You see, the baby who feels good is the baby who is fed, dry, and held. And the baby who feels bad is the baby who goes hungry, wet, and uncomforted. Make sense? You see, these feelings are eternalized into a description of the self. You see, we all retain images in our emotional brain of this very early bodily way of thinking. Did you hear me out? I said we all retain images in our emotional brain of this very early bodily way of thinking. When we are feeling crummy, as we do when we are lonely, we feel as if we were bad. So, this creates a problem with many people because they feel as though that they have done something wrong to cause their feelings of badness. They feel guilty and try to all sorts of ways to work through the guilt. They confess and confess and confess. They read their Bible. They attend adult Sunday school class. They volunteer at the local homeless shelter. Yet they still can't seem to feel forgiven. They can't feel forgiven because the roots of this kind of guilt is not sin, it's loneliness and it's isolation. And number 4, Sharon, is addiction. Number 4 is addiction. And addiction is a compulsive psychological need for something. In other words, something that someone needs to survive. People are usually addicted to a specific substance such as alcohol or cocaine, speed, or food. But people can also feel addicted to activities such as sex, gambling, work, destructive relationships, religiosity, achievement, and materialism. And these substances and activities never satisfy. They never satisfy. However, because they don't deal with the real problem is why. You see, we don't really need alcohol, street drugs, or sex. We can live very well without these things, right? However, we really do need relationship though. Okay? We need relationship, and we cannot live very well without it. So you see, we have already seen what happens when it's absent. Remember what God said in the Garden of Eden? It is not good for the man to be alone. With addiction, as with other symptoms, a real need is getting a false solution based on deceitful desires, as Paul tells us in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 18 through 24. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 18 through 24. Having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their heart, who is being past feelings, have given themselves over to lewdness, to work of uncleanness, with greediness. But you have not so learned Christ, if indeed you have learned him and have been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus, that you put off concerning your former conduct the old man, which grows corrupt according to the deceitful lust, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on the new man, which was created according to God in true righteousness and holiness. So you see, curing addictions requires a return to sensitivity and humanity, or humility. I said curing addictions requires a return to sensitivity and humility. You see, addiction, people must admit their powerlessness and their need for God and others, as well as soften their heart toward those they have injured and realize their deceitful desires. You see, addictions are not real desires. They are substitutes. You hear me out? I said addictions are not real desires. They are substitutes for some other need of the real self. An essential step in the healing of addictions is finding out the real need being masked by the deceitful desire. You see, one of these real needs is attachment and bonding emotionally. Isolated people can't get relationship, so they go for something else. Did you hear me out? I said one of the real needs is attachment and bonding emotionally. Isolated people can't get relationships, so they go for something else. You see, Satan convinces them that they really want the food. They really want the sex or the crack. And they order their whole life around it. But they really need their emptiness to be filled up with loving feelings and connections with other humans and with God. So you see, when the inner hunger for relationship is filled with love, then the driving force behind many addictions goes away. I said when the inner hunger for relationship is filled with love, then the driving force behind many addictions goes away. And yes, the person needs prayer of deliverance. You see, not all addictions, as we shall see, come from isolation. But many do. I said not all addictions come from isolation, but many do. And if someone cannot bond with another person, then guess what? Guess what's going to happen if someone cannot bond with another person? They will bond with a prostitute's body, a bottle, or a half-gallon of ice cream. All the while going relationally hungry inside. You know, there's a story about this woman. One woman's struggle with food addiction. Put it this way. She had chose to give someone a call instead of eating. She could, although, feel the strong pull toward the fridge, but she interpreted that as a pull toward love. So she called someone and then went over to the person's house and felt welcomed and she felt loved. Well, she noticed then that she wasn't hungry anymore. So since that day, she learned to do the very same thing more and more. She found out it wasn't really food that she wanted at all. It was love. And number 5, Sharon. Distorted thinking. Distorted thinking. You see, as people are shut off from others, their anger, sadness, and depression begin to interfere with their thinking process. Their circuits are overloaded, and their thought process become distorted. Did you know that paranoia is a mental demonic disorder characterized by excessive or irrational superstition and distrust of others? I said paranoia is a mental demonic disorder characterized by excessive or irrational superstition and distrust of others is one form of distorted thinking. You see, people's inner isolation becomes so great that they feel attacked by the pain and project it outward. They fear that others are trying to hurt them and can't be trusted. Therefore, they avoid other people and isolate themselves even more. Paranoid people don't get better on their own. Right? Said paranoid people don't get better on their own. You can't just tell them to change their thinking. And this is an isolated assignment. And isolation is the problem. So isolated people come up with all sorts of delusions and obsessions to explain their internal pain. And they have to make sense of their pain somehow. And the only way that they have is to imagine that the world must really be the way that they feel inside. So when their eternal world begins to change, their perception of the outside world begins to change also. Hurt always interferes with clear thinking. And David said it well, didn't he? In Psalms chapter 73, verses 21 through 22, David said it well. Thus my heart was grieved, and I was vexed in my mind. I was also so foolish and ignorant. I was like a beast before you. So you see, when David was hurting, he called himself senseless and ignorant, and as stupid as a beast. And you know, People with paranoia also, of course, needs prayer of deliverance as well. And I want you to know I don't think everything's a demon, but there's a lot of things it is. Maybe not everything, but a lot of times people need that deeper prayer. When they can't get over it, when they can't shake it, when they can't quit doing it, then they're going to have deeper prayer. Amen? Psalms chapter 73, verse 21 through 22. And I think I'm going to stop right there. I don't want to overload you guys with too much. And tomorrow night, hopefully, if nothing happens, we'll be able to continue this message on bonding. I hope you guys got something out of the Word tonight.